When Ethan Grant was young, there was once a woman he loved. The day Sarah returned to the country after finalizing her divorce, I was left forgotten in a torrential downpour. That day, I borrowed an umbrella from a passing sanitation worker, then went to the airport and randomly bought the next available flight. I didn't care where it was headed, anywhere was fine, as long as it wasn't a place with Ethan and Sarah. At 6 p.m., Ethan's car arrived home. It wasn't his wife Emily who came out to greet him, but a housekeeper. That's when he remembered that he'd forgotten to pick her up from the market. He had gotten caught up worrying about Sarah. But it didn't really matter. His wife was gentle and soft-spoken by nature. She would never get angry over something so trivial. At 7 p.m. the rain stopped, but it was already completely dark. Emily still hadn't returned. Ethan began to feel a strange, growing unease. He called her 3 times. The first time, there was no answer. The second and third times, the calls wouldn't even go through. The storm had come on suddenly, and the sky turned black almost instantly. I had fled to a nearby building's awning to take shelter, rain-soaked and disoriented, watching the relentless downpour with a blank stare. An hour earlier, Ethan had said he was coming to pick me up and take me home. But now, he was nowhere in sight. One by one, the girls around me, who had also been waiting out the rain, were being picked up. Their boyfriends or husbands tilted umbrellas carefully over their heads, shielding them from the rain with gentle hands. I figured Ethan must be doing the same for Sarah by now. She was the woman he had once loved when he was young, the one he lost due to a twist of fate. I'd heard she had suffered greatly in her marriage. During the 3 months of her divorce battle, her mother had also passed away. Ethan had been so worried he often couldn't sleep at night, sighing and brooding constantly. Today was the day Sarah finally returned home after her divorce had been finalized. That morning, Ethan had taken a shower and put on a freshly tailored suit. The tie he wore had a faint mandala pattern. Since we got married, I had taken care of everything for him, his meals, his clothes, his daily life. But that tie wasn't one I had bought. The rain came down endlessly, rattling like beans in a hot pan, but suddenly, my heart went quiet. Smiling, I waved at a passing sanitation worker and traded the fresh seafood I had just bought for the old umbrella in her hand. She looked delighted, and I couldn't help but smile too. The umbrella was worn, but it still blocked the wind and rain, better than a man who kept failing to show up. I walked out of the market and casually hailed a taxi by the roadside. When I got to the airport, I realized I had nowhere to go. The only family I had left was my grandmother, but if I went to her, she would know right away that something had gone wrong. I didn't want her to worry. In the end, I simply bought the earliest flight available. I didn't care where I went, anywhere would do, as long as there was no Ethan and no Sarah. 3 years of marriage, and Sarah had silently filled every part of my life like the air, soundless, invisible, but everywhere. I didn't want to endure it anymore. Right before boarding the plane, my phone suddenly rang. It was Ethan calling. I thought for a moment but didn't answer. When the ringing stopped, I blocked his number. Ethan returned home at 6. As his car came to a stop, only the housekeeper came out to greet him. He hesitated, then took off his coat but didn't hand it over. Instead, he draped it over his arm. "Where's my wife? She's not back yet?" he asked. He froze. That's when he finally remembered that Emily had gone to the market. She had said she would go pick him up afterward so they could come home together. But when Sarah collapsed from grief at her mother's grave, Ethan had rushed her to the hospital and completely forgot about picking up his wife. He glanced out at the pouring rain and a faint guilt crept into his heart. Was Emily angry? But as soon as the thought surfaced, Ethan smiled and shook his head. He'd never met anyone more gentle or forgiving than his wife. She never got upset over things like this. "Sir, looks like you got caught in the rain. You should go upstairs and take a hot bath," the housekeeper quietly reminded him. Ethan nodded. "If my wife comes back, let her know I'm upstairs." He went upstairs to take a hot shower, though for some reason he couldn't quite explain why. The dates soaking in the hot water didn't seem to settle Ethan's nerves. As he stepped out of the bathroom, he felt a bit congested and went to grab some cold medicine, but couldn't find the first aid kit anywhere. He checked the time. It was almost 7 p.m. Emily still hadn't come home. The rain outside seemed to have stopped, but the sky had only grown darker. He pulled out his phone and called Emily. The ringtone rang for a long time, but no one answered. Eventually, he hung up himself. Ethan frowned. This had never happened before. Emily never ignored his calls. Maybe she was stuck in traffic because of the rain, or there had been some minor accident on the road. The thought made his heart clench suddenly. He quickly called again. But the call that had just gone through earlier now wouldn't even connect. His frown deepened and his face slowly grew cold. Still, he held his temper and tried a third time. Again, it couldn't be connected. He stood there gripping the phone for a long while, then casually looked up the reason online. Oh, turns out, when this happens, it usually means the other person has blocked your number. Ethan let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Maybe he should take back what he said about never having met anyone gentler or more forgiving than his wife. By the time the plane landed in that unfamiliar city, it was already late at night. As the signal returned, my phone started filling up with new messages. I noticed a series of texts from an unfamiliar number. "Hi Emily, this is Sarah. I heard that you and Ethan got into a fight because of me, and you haven't come home. I'm really worried and truly sorry. I think I should explain things between me and Ethan. He did like me once, but that was years ago. He's always called me big sister, and I've always treated him like a younger brother. I never wanted to come between the two of you. That was never my intention. No one wants Ethan to be happy more than I do, Emily. After reading this, would you please give him a call? Or at least, let us know you're safe." I found it laughable. If they were really worried about my safety, there were countless ways to find me. With the kind of background Ethan had, looking up my ID info would be ridiculously easy. But after I left home, the first one to reach out wasn't the police. It was Sarah. I was thoroughly sick of the life I was living. Every little ripple, and Sarah knew about it almost instantly. I didn't respond, but Sarah was persistent. She called me. I answered. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, suddenly, a low laugh. A moment later, Sarah's voice came through. "So you're not as composed as Ethan described after all. You really held it in, huh? 3 years, and you're just now making a fuss, Emily." Then she called my name and said, "Since you're so willing to step aside on your own, I'll make sure Ethan gives you a bit more in the divorce settlement." I smiled. "Miss Sarah, you've been divorced once, and you went through a tough legal battle. You must have plenty of experience by now. That's good. If I get more money, I'll buy you a coffee." And with that, I hung up on her and immediately blocked the number, enabling filters for all unknown calls. On the third day after I left home, Ethan finally called my grandmother, my only living relative who lived thousands of miles away. After some small talk, he cautiously brought me up. "Emily mentioned wanting to visit you the other day," he said. "No need," my grandmother replied. "I'm doing just fine. That trip would be too tiring for her." Ethan clutched the phone. From the large terrace, he could see the sun setting low in the west, and it felt like his heart was sinking right along with it. He had assumed, of course, that Emily must have gone to her grandmother's in a moment of anger. After all, she had no one else. That was the only place she could go. But she hadn't gone there. So where had Emily been all these days? He turned around and caught sight of a familiar detail, the vanity table, spotless as always. But this time, her comb hadn't been put away. He walked over and picked it up. A few long strands of hair were tangled in the teeth of the comb. Emily's hair had always been thick and black, never permed, never dyed. Ethan gripped the comb, his thoughts swirling, gaze unfocused. It wasn't until Sarah called the second time that he snapped out of it. "Ethan," her soft voice floated through the speaker, "I just passed by your garden. The roses have all wilted. You should have the gardener clean them up. They don't look very nice now." "No need," he said, directly rejecting her for the first time. There was a moment of silence on her end, as if caught off guard. But soon she continued, "Ethan, are you angry? I understand. This is your and Emily's home. Of course it's up to you both." Her voice trembled at the end, barely holding back a sob. Ethan's heart softened again. "That's not what I meant. Sis, have you heard anything from Emily?" "No, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have come back." Sarah began to cry on the other end, her sobs small and broken. But instead of feeling sympathy, Ethan suddenly felt agitated. Emily rarely cried. Only on the night of their wedding, when she was in pain, had she cried in his arms. The only other time was during their first year of marriage, when he missed her birthday. He'd left abruptly to fly abroad after Sarah's then-husband had beaten her. He'd been too worried. Ethan couldn't explain it, but the more he thought, the more frustrated he became. In 3 years of marriage, he had never realized that Emily could be this stubborn or willful. He walked over to the bed and sat down. After a long moment of hesitation, he decided to call Emily's only close friend. The friend was surprised and said he hadn't heard from her, and she hadn't visited his city either. When Ethan hung up, his hand trembled slightly. He lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it. Emily had always been particular about cleanliness. When she was home, there wasn't a trace of any odd smell in the entire house. Then the phone rang again. It was a landline from an unfamiliar number. Normally, he would have ignored a call like that, but this time, he answered immediately. His voice trembled a little. "It's me, Ethan." "Ethan," came Emily's voice, calm and steady, though something in it felt far away. For once, the usually composed and quiet Ethan sounded unusually sharp. "Emily, you're not a child. Running away from home? That's the kind of immature thing a 3-year-old does. Do you have any idea what kind of damage this could cause the Grant family if people find out?" "I'm sorry." Ethan gripped the phone tighter and loosened his tie. But despite his harsh tone, he felt like a heavy stone had been lifted from his chest. "If you know it's wrong, then come back," he said, softening his voice slightly. "Ethan, I called for something else." "What is it?" "I sent you something in the mail. You should have received it by now." "What could you possibly need to mail? You could have just brought it home with you." Her tone was still gentle and even. "I'm not coming back. Just make sure you sign for it. After you read it, if it means nothing to you, just sign the bottom. I'll call you again in 2 days. This phone belongs to someone else." "Please don't call me back. I won't be able to answer." "Emily, what are you talking about?" Ethan felt his heart, which had just begun to relax, suddenly seize up again. "I've been married to you for 3 years, Ethan, and I haven't been very happy. So, let's get a divorce." Ethan said nothing. Emily said nothing either, as if politely waiting for his response. "Where are you?" "That doesn't matter." Ethan looked out the window at the quiet, dimming sky. "Emily, what is this? Some kind of tantrum?" On the other end, she didn't say another word. It sounded like she let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh, and then she hung up. Ethan reflexively tried to call back, but when someone answered, it was an unfamiliar older woman. She spoke in a dialect Ethan didn't recognize. Ethan couldn't understand a word and could only apologize before hanging up. Dusk settled heavily over everything, and Ethan sat still in that deepening twilight, unmoving. In the 3 years of their marriage, Emily had been like a glass of warm water held at a constant 113 degrees, never too hot, never too cold. She didn't get angry, never raised her voice. She always spoke gently and softly. Everyone liked her. Everyone praised her. So much so that Ethan had nearly forgotten that their marriage had begun not from love, but from a long-standing grudge between their families. Someone who could claim a seat at the head of the Grant family table based on such a small favor from the past. How could he have ever truly been as harmless and pure-hearted as he appeared? Ethan turned and walked over to the vanity, finally setting down the comb he'd been clutching. In the mirror, he saw the tight furrow of his brow, a storm of anger simmering in his eyes. He was never one to show emotion, yet now, something so seemingly minor had completely shaken his composure. He quickly pulled himself together, restoring his usual cold expression, and left the master bedroom, heading downstairs. Sarah called to him from the living room, and he only offered a faint response. Then he told the housekeeper to bring him the packages that had been delivered that day. From the pile, he picked out the envelope sent by Emily and opened it. Sarah stood nearby, gasping softly in surprise. Without a change in expression, Ethan tore the divorce papers in half and tossed them into the trash. "Ethan," Sarah said gently, stepping forward to tug lightly on his sleeve. "Don't be upset. Emily probably just acted out on impulse. She's always been soft and sensible. I'm sure this is my fault. If I hadn't come back, if I hadn't troubled you, none of this would have happened." Ethan's voice was cold. What does it have to do with you? She's the one being immature. She's immature? Isn't that because you spoiled her? Sarah gave a forced laugh. I've heard all about how in love you two are while I was abroad. Her voice caught before she finished the sentence, and suddenly she burst into tears. Ethan let out a cold laugh. Why did I marry her? Even if no one else knows, you should. Sarah stared at him through her tears. Ethan, was it really because of me? He didn't answer, just gently pulled his sleeve from her grip. I have something to take care of. Do you want the driver to take you home, or are you staying here tonight? Sarah wiped her eyes. I'll wait here for you. After everything that's happened between you and Emily, I wouldn't be able to sleep anyway. Ethan nodded, told the housekeeper to prepare a guest room, asked the driver to ready the car, and then left. Sarah watched him go, then glanced at the shredded divorce papers in the trash. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she slowly sat down on the sofa. Why had Ethan torn up the divorce agreement? He didn't look like a man who intended to get a divorce at all. The day I left, I already knew, if Ethan wanted to find someone, it would be effortless. It all came down to whether he wanted to or not. So when I saw Ethan outside the guest house that day, I wasn't surprised. It was early autumn, and he was dressed in a light gray windbreaker, leaning against the side of the car, smoking. He was handsome and tall, every movement full of quiet magnetism. Compared to him, I looked especially plain, wearing a loose cotton and linen dress, my long hair tied up casually with a handkerchief, no makeup, and holding grocery bags from the supermarket. I looked more like a housemaid from the old Grant estate. When we had first gotten married, I used to feel inferior. But now, I had long since made peace with it. Just like a simple home-cooked stir-fry could never be served at a luxurious banquet, Ethan and I were a mismatch from the very beginning. He stubbed out his cigarette and looked at me calmly. I set down the grocery bag in my hand. Ethan glanced at his watch. His voice, as always, was low and cold. Go pack your things. 30 minutes should be enough. Did you sign it? I held out my hand to him. Give me the divorce papers. I'll go back with you, and we can handle the formalities. Ethan's pale, detached gaze didn't betray much emotion, but his eyes had darkened slightly. Right now isn't the best time to announce our divorce publicly, so let's keep it quiet for now. As long as the paperwork is mostly done, that's enough. You know, next week is the company's anniversary celebration. You'll need to attend it with me. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, his smile sharp with irony. You timed this very precisely, but you should know, I'm not someone who's easily manipulated. I didn't say anything, I simply looked at him. We had shared everything a married couple could. But while a man can separate sex from love, a woman often can't. That rain didn't soak my body, but it soaked my heart. A kind of cold that Ethan would never understand, because he had never truly loved me. If you sign the divorce papers, I'll attend the anniversary celebration with you. I'll cooperate with anything the company needs me to do, I said, looking at him with the same soft smile I used to give him long ago. Ethan, this doesn't hurt you in the slightest. He stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. After the company celebration next week, I'll sign. I didn't return home with Ethan. I only came back to the capital the day before the celebration. And to avoid gossip or rumors about a marriage crisis, he sent his own car to pick me up from the airport and drive me back to the marital home. When I stepped out of the car, Sarah greeted me at the door like a hostess. Emily, you're finally back, she said, stepping forward quickly to take my hand, her eyes red as tears welled up. I looked at her coolly. Her clothes, her makeup, every accessory had clearly been carefully prepared, elegant in that understated, polished way that wealthy women always seem to master. She looked like the perfect lady of the house welcoming a guest. I said nothing. I simply withdrew my hand. Her nails were immaculately done, her pale fingers adorned with a gemstone ring and a diamond band. My hand, by contrast, wore nothing. I had long since taken off my wedding ring. There was even a thin callus in the center of my palm. When I first learned of Sarah's existence, I foolishly compared myself to her in secret. But now, no matter how beautiful or regal she looked, I didn't feel a single ripple in my heart. I didn't look at her again. I didn't respond. I just walked past her, grocery bag in hand. Sarah bit her lip, clearly embarrassed. The housekeeper came forward. "Ma'am, let me carry that for you." I smiled and avoided her hand. "No need." The housekeeper didn't dare insist. She looked awkwardly at Ethan. "Let her be," Ethan said, withdrawing his gaze and walking toward the main building. But I didn't follow him to the main house. Instead, I went straight to the guest annex. That was when Ethan finally lost his temper. Right in front of the staff, I had done something that made both him and Sarah look bad. I didn't stop walking. I didn't respond. I had no desire to speak to Ethan anymore. All I wanted now was for the company celebration to end quickly, so that this marriage could end even faster. When Ethan and I entered the banquet hall arm in arm, the evening was already in full swing. He acted like the perfect, attentive husband, and I, as always, played the role of the graceful, elegant wife that everyone praised. As we mingled and made small talk with guests, he kept our fingers interlaced, occasionally glancing at me with soft eyes. I would lower my gaze and smile in return. But where once that smile had been shy and joyful, tonight it was nothing but a mask. I loathed this version of myself, and I despised him even more. All I wanted was for it to end. But just as the dinner was drawing to a close, a dish was placed in front of me, a simple braised fish. Its delicate aroma drifted up, sharp and familiar. A sudden wave of nausea rolled violently through my stomach. I stood up abruptly and rushed to the restroom, vomiting until my head spun. When I tried to get up, my vision went black, and I passed out. By the time I opened my eyes again, I was already in the hospital. Many members of the Grant family had gathered. Ethan was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand, his face filled with a rare kind of joy. "Emily, do you know? You're pregnant," he said. "Exactly 45 days. His voice was low and gentle, as if he were afraid of startling me. That kind of tenderness from Ethan was rare, so rare that I felt disoriented for a moment. In 3 years of marriage, moments like this could be counted on one hand, and during those 3 years he had barely seen Sarah at all. Yet every time he did, he treated her with such unmistakable care. That kind of gentleness, he gave it to her simply because she was the woman he loved. As for me, any kindness he ever showed wasn't really for me, and now it was just for the child I happened to be carrying. "Your grandmother already knows about the pregnancy," Ethan said, still holding my hand, a soft smile on his lips. "I've already sent someone to bring her here. She was so happy," she cried over the phone. Tears suddenly welled up in my eyes. 3 years of marriage without a child had always weighed on my grandmother's heart, but she never knew that the reason I hadn't gotten pregnant was because Ethan didn't want children. He said he wanted a few more years of just the two of us. He had always been careful, almost excessively so, about contraception. So why was he so overjoyed now? After the Grant family left, the room fell into silence. Ethan brought me a glass of water. "Let's not talk about divorce anymore," he said. "You should focus on your health and on the baby." I pushed the warm glass away. "I don't want this child." There wasn't even the slightest change in Ethan's expression. He lowered his head and looked at me from above. "Then you can tell your grandmother yourself. If you're willing to break her heart at her age, go ahead." Ethan was sure I would continue to give in, sacrificing myself again, just so my grandmother wouldn't worry. But he had forgotten something. My grandmother, when she was young, had defied her family and broken off a match with a national-level athlete. She had fled a forced marriage and run away on her own to distant relatives 1,000 miles away. When her husband later became an addict, she had divorced him cleanly and took her only daughter away in secret. She may seem soft and harmless now, like a gentle old lady with no fight left in her, but I know better. If she ever found out what Ethan had done to me, she would support every single decision I made. Ethan pushed aside all his work obligations and stayed by my side. News of me fainting during the company's anniversary celebration and being diagnosed as pregnant had already spread like wildfire. The media crowded the hospital entrance day and night. On the day I was discharged, the Grant family sent a whole convoy to pick me up. People said I was lucky, born into an ordinary family, yet married into the Grants, with a loving husband, doting in-laws, and now a baby on the way. They called me a winner in life. What a joke. The world judges a woman's worth by the cards handed to her by a man. No one looks deeper. No one asks what her real life is like beneath the surface, how much darkness she might be drowning in. Sarah had already left Beijing. Her extended family wanted her to move back and stay with them long term. In the car, Ethan held my hand. "From the beginning," he said, "I told you there was nothing romantic between Sarah and me. We grew up together. When we were little, she once split her forehead open protecting me. She still has a scar. Yes, I liked her when I was young. But now, I only see her as a sister. Emily, there's no reason for you to be upset over something so trivial." Then he added, "But since it clearly bothers you, I'll be more careful in the future. I won't meet with Sarah privately again, and I won't have any further contact with her." Ethan reached out and held my shoulders, trying to pull me into his embrace. "Let's end all this here, okay? Now that we have a baby, let's raise it together. Let's just live a good life, the three of us." And honestly, at that moment, I almost believed him. I'd heard that when a woman is pregnant, her body produces a hormone that makes her instinctively want to protect the tiny embryo inside her, even at the cost of everything else. These past few days, I had wavered. I'd been torn, conflicted, shaken. My grandmother had spoken with me too. She said, "A husband can be someone else's, but a child is always your own." And honestly, for a moment, I truly considered it. Maybe this pregnancy was heaven's way of giving Ethan and me one last chance. No woman ever truly wants to destroy her own child. I was no exception. But just as I began to waver, Sarah found a way to contact me. "Do you know," she asked, "why Ethan suddenly stopped using protection half a year ago?" I froze. Now that she mentioned it, it had been around that time when Ethan stopped being so careful. "Because that's when I decided to get a divorce," she said. "You're probably thinking, if I had made up my mind to leave, wouldn't Ethan have been even more cautious about avoiding a child?" Sarah laughed suddenly. It was a sharp, bitter laugh, one that scraped along my nerves. "Emily," she said, "I can't have children. If I could, do you think Ethan ever would have compromised and married you? Do you understand now where your baby came from? It was never about you. That child is here simply to clear the way, for me." She paused, then added, "I wasn't supposed to tell you this now. I was going to wait until the baby was born, until everything had fallen into place. But I changed my mind. If I can't have what I want, then I'd rather burn it all down than let you give birth to Ethan's child." I sat there, chilled to the bone. It felt like that cold seeped in through my feet and crept into every part of my body. But oddly, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something like quiet relief. At that moment, I knew clearly, all the emotion, all the lingering attachment I had for Ethan, was gone. Completely and effortlessly, like shedding a second skin. "Have you ever thought," I asked slowly, "what if I'd chosen not to listen to you? What if I had insisted on keeping this child?" "You wouldn't," she said. "That's not who you are. You seem gentle, tolerant, soft-spoken, but deep down, you can't even stand a grain of sand in your eye." I smiled. "Thank you, Sarah, for telling me this." "Emily, please don't hate me," she said. I love him too much. You know how it is. Love is always selfish, always blind." I didn't reply. I hung up the phone, walked to the window, and stared out. In the twilight garden, nearly all the roses had withered. A chilly gust of wind blew past, and the last bloom clinging to a bare branch finally dropped into the dirt. The flower had fallen, and with it, the dream should end too. The last time Ethan and I had dinner together, I wore a light green dress. He paused when he saw it. It looked familiar. It took him a moment to remember. Yes, I'd worn something like this the first time we met. Back then, he had just lost a bitter fight with his family. Sarah, devastated, had agreed to an arranged marriage abroad. Ethan had reluctantly come to meet me, looking for an excuse to reject the engagement. But before he could say anything truly cutting, I'd already begun to cry. He had never seen a girl cry like that. My eyes were large, and tears welled in them for a long time before falling in quiet drops. I choked out an apology. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were being forced to come meet me. I'll go home and tell the elders to call off the engagement." He had been the one to speak cruelly, and yet I was the one crying, apologizing for making him uncomfortable. He watched me stand, still crying, and accidentally knock over a cup of coffee. The stain spread across my light green dress. I bent down to wipe it up, tears falling steadily onto the floor. Somehow, in that moment, something in him stirred. Maybe it was the hopelessness of lost love, or the thought of Sarah marrying someone else. But as he looked at me, clumsy, tear-streaked, apologizing, he suddenly felt the quiet pull of surrender, a helplessness that made him want to drift wherever the tide took him. "You're Emily Chen, right?" he asked. I looked up, startled. I nodded gently. "Yes, I want to marry you." She clutched the hem of her skirt tightly, pressing her lips together, her long, curled lashes lowered, hiding the redness in her eyes. She gave a small nod, barely noticeable, but her face turned bright red. "Then let's get married," he said. His eyes widened in an instant, filled with panic and disbelief. But you just," I smiled, leaning back against the chair with an easy grace, looking at him lazily. The Grant family always had good genes, and back then Ethan was still young, full of energy, with just a hint of charm and mischief. I smiled at him like that, and he turned completely flustered. "I was just teasing you, little Miss Chen," I said. "Don't go tattling to my grandmother." He shook his head quickly. I won't say anything." His ears turned scarlet, and he couldn't even look at me again. After the date, he walked me home. When I got out of the car, he held my hand. 3 months later, we were engaged. 7 months after that, I married him. And now, after 3 years of marriage, I was pregnant with our child. Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. This child had arrived just as he'd planned, right on schedule. He should have felt joy. And yet that joy seemed strangely tainted by something he couldn't name. Lately, he kept wondering whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. Of course, a boy would be ideal. But if it were a girl, and she looked like Emily, well, that wouldn't be bad either. But why did he hope the child would look like her? In his original plan, this child was supposed to grow up calling Sarah Mom. Ethan had a vague sense that something was starting to slip out of his control. And yet, he didn't want to stop it. He didn't want to rein himself in. Somehow he wanted to fall, completely. That night, dinner was cooked by me. I hadn't had any nausea that day and was feeling quite well, so Ethan didn't object. I even had a tiny sip of wine that was safe for pregnancy. As the light buzz set in, Ethan found me unusually beautiful that evening. "You did your makeup," he said. "Just a little," I smiled. "The lipstick shade is nice, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is." He smiled too, his eyes curving. He stood and walked behind me, resting both hands on the arms of my chair. Leaning in, his tall frame enveloped me. His prominent nose brushed past my temple, his voice low and intimate. "I've asked the housekeeper to move your things back to the master bedroom." I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head either. I simply raised my glass and clinked it against his once more. Later, he took me for a walk in the garden. The moon was bright, and the stars scattered across the sky. Wilted rose petals were strewn across the lawn. I was quiet the whole way, the hem of my long skirt fluttering softly in the early autumn breeze. Ethan followed behind me, a little tipsy now, feeling that the scene had the serene beauty of a painting, like time had stilled. Whether or not I returned to the master bedroom that night, he wasn't quite sure. He slept deeply, more soundly than he had in a long time. When he woke, it was already noon the next day. He turned over, instinctively reaching out for the other side of the bed. His head throbbed slightly from the wine. He sat up with effort. The room was empty. There was only one pillow on the bed. I hadn't come back the night before. What Ethan didn't know was that it wouldn't be just last night. From that day forward, for every night and day that followed, I would never return to that room again. After the procedure, my grandmother was waiting to take me home. I was wrapped in a thick coat, yet I couldn't stop shivering. The anesthesia had worn off, and a deep ache had begun to stir in my lower abdomen. My grandmother gently placed a warm compress against me. She held my hand tightly, and I followed my grandmother home. Her back was slightly hunched now, and her legs had grown weak with age, but her hand was still warm and strong, as if lending me all the courage I needed to move forward. Back then, I had told the Grant family clearly, we didn't want any kind of favor repaid. My grandmother understood better than anyone that people from different worlds don't always belong together. Even now, when everything had come to this, she didn't blame anyone. She only said, "I just feel bad for you." I leaned against her shoulder and teased softly, "If you feel bad for me, then make me your egg custard. I haven't had your egg custard in forever." "Then from now on," she said gently, Grandma will make it for you every single day. I walked arm in arm with her. She steadied me with quiet strength. The noonday sun spilled across our shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something warm again. As we approached the hospital entrance, I saw Ethan's car parked out front. He stepped out with a cold expression, his lips pressed into a thin, tense line. My grandmother instinctively moved to shield me behind her, but I gave a small shake of my head. Ethan strode up quickly and grabbed my shoulders. "Emily, where's the baby?" he asked. "You terminated it? How dare you? How could you, Emily?" His hands tightened around my shoulders. I could see the pallor in his face, the flush of anger and disbelief rising beneath his skin. His eyes were full of rage and something that looked like pain. "Does it hurt?" I asked him softly. "Good. Then maybe you'll understand a little." One by one, I pried his fingers off me. "Please sign the papers," I said. "Let's get the divorce over with." "I'm not divorcing you," Ethan said, each word cold and clipped. I looked at him, surprised, but there was no real emotion left in me. "Then we'll take it to court," I replied. "If you want to turn this into a public scandal, let all those fairy tale stories about us become gossip at dinner tables, I don't care." I gave him a flat, meaningless smile. "I'll go along with it." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue further, but just then his phone rang. I faintly heard Sarah's name. His face changed instantly. "I understand. I'll be there right away," he said into the phone, voice tight and rushed. He hung up and looked back at me. "Emily, wait for me. We need to talk this through." But I didn't wait. I went straight to see Mrs. Grant. I didn't hide anything. I didn't embellish either. I just repeated word for word what Sarah had said to me. Years ago, Mrs. Grant couldn't accept Sarah's infertility and played the villain who broke up her son's romance. Eventually, under pressure from the elders, she'd grudgingly accepted me as a daughter-in-law. These past 3 years, she'd been neither warm nor cold toward me, but never cruel. She'd genuinely been happy when she found out I was pregnant. But now, the baby was gone. I figured even if she hated me, she'd hate Sarah more. Sarah might have hoped to rekindle her relationship with Ethan, but she'd probably never make it past Mrs. Grant again. Sarah had said one thing that was absolutely right. I was never the forgiving, generous type. I was petty. I wanted the person I loved to see no one but me. And I wanted those who hurt me to suffer, to never find joy or peace, because they'd shown no mercy when they'd hurt me. Mrs. Grant was a ruthless woman when she needed to be. Just as she'd once forced Sarah to marry far away, this time she took action again. Very quickly, Ethan and I legally ended our marriage. Under the full weight of Mrs. Grant's pressure, Sarah crumbled. She was pushed to marry again, and I heard she even attempted suicide. Ethan stayed by her side at the hospital for a full day and night. I also heard that, in his rage, he tried to take Sarah away with him. Mrs. Grant was so furious she slapped him twice and threatened to disown him and kick him out of the family. But none of it had anything to do with me anymore. I followed my grandmother back to her small town, 1,000 miles away. We renovated her little courtyard house and made plans to fill the yard with blooming roses come spring. Just after I finished my month of recovery, Ethan unexpectedly showed up. He didn't come in. The gate remained closed. He just stood outside and waited. For a long, long time. He didn't leave until the early hours of the morning. But the very next day, when I went out to get the milk, I saw him again. It was early winter, and he was wearing only a thin coat. I, on the other hand, was wrapped tightly in one of my grandmother's padded robes, afraid of the cold as always. You see, we've always been people from 2 different worlds. The neighbors stared at him with curiosity, hesitating in their steps. After all, it wasn't often someone as handsome and well-dressed as him showed up in a small town like ours. But I only glanced at him once before looking away. When I was young, I had been drawn to his looks, so foolishly captivated that I married him without hesitation. But marriage, like water, is something whose temperature only you can feel. I had chosen this road and I had accepted everything that came with it. Ethan didn't say a word, but he followed me the whole way. After picking up the milk, I bought some breakfast, looped around, and returned. Still, he followed me. When I finally reached the gate, he spoke. "Emily," he called my name. I didn't stop. I pushed open the gate and stepped inside, turning around to close it behind me. But he stepped forward quickly and raised his hand to block the door. "Sarah's getting married next spring," he said. I had never been the kind of person to throw a fit. I'd never even truly argued with someone before. But in that moment, I snapped. I flung the bottle of warm milk straight into his face. His expensive wool coat and cashmere sweater underneath were soaked and stained. He looked stunned, frowning deeply. "Ethan Grant," I said. "If she were marrying you next spring, I might still respect you as a man. But as it stands, clearly, you don't love her that much. After all, if you really wanted to marry her, you could have given up your spot as heir of the Grant family and done it. But you didn't." What I said was only half true. He didn't love Sarah that much, at least, not anymore. But it wasn't because he couldn't give up his status. It was because the feelings he once had for her had long since faded. When I got pregnant, Ethan had genuinely thought for a moment that the three of us might become a real family. He had buried the filthiest, most selfish part of himself deep inside, never intending to let it see the light of day. He had once crossed a line with Sarah on a lonely night overseas, out of pity and weakness. He'd made promises about children and marriage in a moment of guilt and impulse, but he regretted it not long after. Still, Sarah had told me, and when she did, I didn't hesitate. I ended the pregnancy, and when Ethan found out the baby was gone, he had only one thought: that he would never be able to keep me. Like a rose, once it falls, it's gone for good. Yet in our old home, traces of me lingered everywhere. The housekeeper still spoke without thinking. "Mrs. Grant likes this. Mrs. Grant said that. If Mrs. Grant knew." And Ethan, every evening when he came home at 6, still hoped, despite knowing full well I was gone, that I might be the one waiting to greet him. He used to think of me as tepid water, always lukewarm, always there, always unremarkable. But a person can't live without water. He often remembered our last dinner together. The way I looked after sipping fruit wine, the color of the lipstick I wore that night, it had been beautiful. He often wondered if, during that walk, he had held my hand, or pulled me into an embrace from behind, called me honey just once, would I have softened, given him one more chance? He also wondered if, that day in the pouring rain, he hadn't forgotten to pick me up, if he had shown up when he promised, would our story have ended differently? But thinking about it now was meaningless. All he could do was force himself to move forward. I was still single. I had turned down many suitors, because, once upon a time, I had loved him deeply. So much so that I couldn't let anyone else into my life, not for a long time. He still visited once or twice a year. But by the 9th visit, the same scene repeated itself. Only this time, the male lead in that story was no longer him. It rained hard that day, just like it had the day he forgot to come for me. But this time, the man in the story didn't make the same mistake Ethan once had. In the middle of the pouring rain, the man's car pulled steadily to a stop. I was standing beneath the eaves of a nearby building, sheltering from the downpour. When I saw the car approach, I instinctively moved to run toward it. But he immediately waved his hand, signaling me to stay put. Then he stepped out of the car himself, walking into the rain without hesitation, completely soaked as he went to retrieve an umbrella. He moved quickly, making his way to me with urgency. When he opened the umbrella, he tilted it entirely in my direction, shielding me from the rain as he guided me into the car first. The distance was only 2 or 3 steps, barely anything at all, but he refused to let me get even the slightest bit wet. He would rather be drenched himself. Ethan sat in his car, watching the entire scene unfold. The windshield wipers swept across the glass in quick, mechanical strokes, but outside, the whole world had been swallowed by rain. The car carrying me drove off into the storm and disappeared down the road. That downpour years ago, the one where Ethan had forgotten me in the rain, had now returned, crashing down upon him with full force. Ethan gave a bitter, hollow laugh. He started his engine, turned the car around, and sped off, slicing through the curtain of rain like an arrow released from a bow. In that fleeting moment, he thought he saw the younger version of me again. Back when we had just gotten engaged, his mother hadn't liked me, but his grandmother had adored me. At our engagement ceremony, his grandmother had pulled me aside and said, "Emily, if Ethan ever bullies you, you come tell Grandma. I'll stand up for you." So back then, whenever he teased me and made me blush, I'd always threaten, "I'm going to tell your grandma." He smiled softly at the memory. And then he remembered our wedding night. I had cried from the pain, and he had held me close, coaxing me gently. He'd even joked, "Why didn't you say you were going to tell Grandma this time?" I'd cried and laughed, furious and embarrassed, and I pounced on him, biting his shoulder in frustration. He had leaned down, wrapped me tightly in his arms, and I eventually gave in, quietly closing my eyes under him. Ethan finally understood. He had fallen for me the very first time we met. He just hadn't realized it until it was too late. It's always like this. People sigh and mourn when the flowers fall, but when they're in full bloom, they rarely cherish them. The year after we divorced, every rose in the garden of our marital home had withered. But 1,000 miles away, in my grandmother's courtyard, the roses bloomed in full. Still, no matter how radiant those flowers were, they no longer belonged to him. Ethan lifted his face to the sky, afraid that if he didn't, the tears would fall in front of everyone. And so, in the midst of the relentless downpour, in the beginning of the new life I had already embraced, the story came to an end.